You want control, you want peace, you want power. Then let me tell you the truth most men aren't ready to hear. When you stop caring, you stop bleeding. When you stop seeking validation, you start radiating presence. And when you stop chasing, you start attracting everything you once begged for. Let me break this down for you. Caring too much is the root of your suffering because it creates a false narrative in your mind that others are supposed to respond to your energy the way you imagine they should. You invest time, emotion, attention, thought, and loyalty into people, assuming that your consistency will be valued, that your patience will be recognized, and that your sacrifices will create bonds. But more often than not, it doesn't. The brutal truth is, the more you give without boundaries, the more you expose yourself to people who take advantage of your emotional generosity. Caring becomes a trap when it's not reciprocated or when it turns into dependency. You begin adjusting your behavior, your plans, your energy around someone else's validation, someone who might not even be aware of the mental weight you carry for them. That's when suffering takes root. You begin overthinking every silence, every delay in reply, every change in tone, every shift in attention. You read into things that were never meant to be analyzed. You start negotiating your self-worth based on how others treat you. You start internalizing rejection, ghosting, indifference as reflections of your own value. But in reality, it's not about you. It's about their emotional capacity, their baggage, their inability to give. And the more you care, the more you try to fix it, the more power you lose. Because you become reactive, not intentional. You get caught in cycles where you keep hoping they'll realize your worth, come back, apologize, or show up differently. But most of the time they don't, and you sit there holding broken expectations like shattered glass in your hands, bleeding over people who never even deserve to touch your soul. Men who care too much fall into patterns of pleasing, over-explaining, over-giving, and waiting. They suppress their needs to keep peace. They avoid conflict to keep people close. They stay silent when boundaries are crossed, and they tell themselves it's strength. But it's not strength. It's self-abandonment. And it's slow suicide. Because every time you betray yourself to stay connected to someone else, you train your mind to accept disrespect, to normalize inconsistency, to romanticize pain. Caring becomes your identity. You pride yourself on loyalty, but loyalty to the wrong people is self-destruction dressed up as virtue. Eventually you wake up bitter, drained, emotionally bankrupt. You realize you've been carrying dead weight, emotionally feeding people who would never do the same for you. You realize that the only one responsible for this suffering is you, because you allowed your care to become your weakness. That's the moment you must choose. Continue bleeding for people who never noticed your wounds, or cauterize the wound and choose indifference. Not hatred, not revenge, but indifference. Because when you stop caring, you stop negotiating your peace. You stop leaking energy into black holes. You stop tying your self-worth to other people's choices. You start reclaiming control over your mind, your heart, and your time. You begin to love with boundaries, give with awareness, and walk away when your spirit starts starving. You stop suffering because you finally understand. No one is coming to save you from the pain you keep choosing. Only you can end it. Your masculine energy expands in detachment because true masculinity is rooted in control over the self, not others. It's not about dominating the external world. It's about mastering your inner landscape. And detachment is the crucible where that mastery is forged. The modern man is often trained to be emotionally available, open, vulnerable at all costs. But without wisdom, That openness becomes exposure. It turns into a weakness when not protected by discernment. Every man is born with a natural masculine core, a sense of presence, purpose, and direction. But that core gets compromised when he begins outsourcing his self-worth to others, when he starts needing affection to feel loved, approval to feel worthy, attention to feel alive. He becomes a slave to responses, a puppet pulled by strings he doesn't control. Detachment is not coldness, it is awareness. It is knowing that emotions are real, but not always reliable. It is the ability to observe your desires without becoming consumed by them. When you detach, you stop letting other people's behavior dictate your mood. You stop flinching every time someone pulls away, goes quiet, or shifts their energy. You no longer ride the emotional roller coaster of someone else's inconsistency. You become grounded, rooted, solid. That stability is magnetic. Women can feel it. The world can feel it. And more importantly, you feel it. Detachment creates a space between stimulus and response. In that space, you are no longer reactive. You choose, you respond, you lead. Your masculine energy sharpens in solitude. It strengthens in silence. It expands in self-restraint. The man who can sit with discomfort without chasing comfort. That man is dangerous. Because he isn't ruled by impulse. He doesn't need someone to complete him. He's already whole. He doesn't beg to be loved. He lets love arrive or walk away without losing his center. This creates a powerful shift in energy. You stop speaking to be heard. You stop trying to prove your worth. You stop chasing relationships for fulfillment. You become the source. The storm calms inside of you. You become still. And in that stillness, you discover that your masculine power isn't something to perform, it's something to embody. And here's what happens next. Everything that used to confuse you now becomes clear. You see the games for what they are. You don't react to breadcrumbs. You don't fantasize over potential. You read people's energy without explanation. And you no longer fall for charm. You look for consistency, effort, and alignment. Detachment sharpens your intuition. You begin trusting your gut instead of ignoring red flags. You stop making excuses for people. You stop explaining your value. You stop over-investing in the emotionally unavailable. You become a minimalist with your emotions, quiet, intentional, and selective, and that is the highest form of masculine discipline. People don't understand this version of you. They'll call you cold, distant, arrogant, but that's only because your silence makes them confront their own noise. Your self-control exposes their lack of control. Your calm presence feels intimidating to those who are used to manipulation working in their favor. But you won't react. You won't explain. You won't return to the old version of yourself that needed to be liked. Because you've outgrown approval. You've outgrown chasing. You've outgrown attaching your worth to anything external. You now understand your power doesn't come from how much you feel, it comes from how well you manage what you feel. Detachment is not running from emotion. It's standing in front of it and choosing not to bow to it. That is the power of masculine energy in its purest, most unshakable form. You flip the power dynamic instantly the moment you decide to stop chasing and start observing. The moment you realize that your attention is a currency and wherever you spend it, you invest your power. Most men don't understand this. They walk through life bleeding attention, validation, energy, and emotional effort toward people who don't even appreciate it. They think that by giving more, caring more, showing up more, they'll eventually be rewarded. But in the real world, effort without boundaries is not respected. It's expected. It becomes background noise. When you overgive without demand, without standards, you position yourself as a subordinate in your own story. You lose leverage. You become emotionally dependent on how others treat you. And that's when the power dynamic tilts against you. But everything changes the second you pull back. Not out of spite, not as a game, but from awareness. When you realize that constantly initiating, constantly checking in, constantly proving yourself is a reflection of lack not strength, you begin to shift. You stop explaining yourself. You stop trying to win anyone over. You stop reacting to silence, to mood swings, to emotional manipulation. You simply observe. You pull your energy back like a king withdrawing from a rigged game, and suddenly everything feels different. People notice, they feel it. That energy you once gave freely is now withheld, not in bitterness, but in discipline, and that discipline rewrites the script. When you don't care whether someone stays or goes, when you stop arguing to be understood, when you no longer flinch at distance or rejection, the entire dynamic between you and others recalibrates, because they can no longer control you through uncertainty. They can't use silence to hurt you because you've made peace with silence. They can't use withholding to trigger you because you're no longer hungry for crumbs. You become the calm center in the middle of their emotional storms. And that calm, that unbothered stillness, that is power, that is presence, that is the magnetism of a man who does not need to dominate because he's already in control of himself. The one who cares less often holds the leverage, not because they're better, but because they're detached. They're not owned by the outcome. They're not obsessed with closure or reciprocation or fairness. They're focused on alignment. If it fits, it flows. If it doesn't, they don't force it. This emotional posture makes them incredibly powerful. Because while others are reacting, chasing, arguing, and projecting, this man remains rooted in himself. People don't know how to engage with him. The usual tactics don't work. Passive-aggressive behavior doesn't trigger him. Guilt trips don't bend him. Emotional manipulation falls flat. He becomes a mirror, exposing others' insecurities without even trying. And here's where the reversal happens. The very people who once took your attention for granted start craving it. The ones who ghosted you now feel haunted by your absence. The ones who dismissed you now wonder why you're so unaffected. You become unpredictable, not because you're playing games, but because you're no longer available for nonsense. You don't respond the same. You don't move the same. You're no longer emotionally accessible in the way you used to be. And that inaccessibility creates intrigue, mystery, obsession, because what's rare is valued, and what's controlled is respected. You've now stepped into a position where your energy is not just felt, it's missed when absent. That is how power shifts. Flipping the power dynamic doesn't require aggression. It requires silence, space, boundaries, emotional detachment. It requires that you stop proving and start observing, that you no longer try to keep people in your life. You let them reveal who they are by how they handle your distance. The right people will match your effort, the wrong ones will fade, and you'll watch it happen without resistance, because you're no longer afraid of losing people. You're only afraid of losing your peace. And once you master that inner stance, you become untouchable. The game doesn't control you anymore, because you're not playing it to win someone. You're playing to win yourself. Emotional control is the foundation of true power, because it separates the man who reacts from the man who leads. In a world where emotions are constantly manipulated, through media, relationships, expectations, and social conditioning, the ability to regulate your inner state is a rare and dangerous trait. Most people are slaves to their emotions. They are triggered easily, provoked effortlessly, and broken silently. One wrong word, one delay in response, one shift in energy, and their entire emotional state collapses. They spiral into anger, anxiety, obsession, or despair. And when you're emotionally volatile, you're easy to control. You're predictable. You're reactive. You become a puppet. And anyone who knows how to pull the strings can dominate you. But a man who masters his emotions is different. He doesn't suppress his feelings. He controls his response to them. He can feel the storm within, but he doesn't let it destroy the room. When disrespected, he doesn't explode. When ignored, he doesn't chase. When provoked, he doesn't give the satisfaction of a reaction. He observes, he waits, he decides, and this ability to delay reaction, to sit with discomfort, to choose his energy consciously, that is what makes him powerful. Because he's no longer driven by impulse, he's guided by intent. People around him begin to notice something different. He's hard to read, impossible to shake, and eerily composed. That calmness isn't emptiness. It's discipline. It's self-command, it's inner authority. Think about it. The world constantly throws emotional bait at you. People test your patience. They trigger your ego. They withdraw love to see if you'll beg. They insult you to get a rise. They disrespect you to gauge your power. And every time you react emotionally, you prove that you're still under the influence of their approval. You show them that they have access to your center. But when you stay calm, when you keep your face still, your voice measured, your presence grounded, they realize they can't reach you that way. You stop being easy to manipulate. You become emotionally encrypted. No one knows what you're feeling, thinking, or planning unless you want them to. That makes you dangerous. That makes you respected. Emotional control also builds trust within yourself. Because when you can trust yourself not to overreact, not to break down, not to lose composure under pressure, you become your own anchor. You don't need constant reassurance from others. You don't need external stability. You become the source of your own peace. This is crucial in relationships, business, conflict, leadership, every domain of life. The man who can stay calm under fire is the man who commands the room. While others panic, he strategizes. While others yell, he listens. While others crumble, he chooses. And in that silence, he gains clarity, perspective, power. Here's what emotional control doesn't mean. It doesn't mean becoming numb or disconnected. It doesn't mean pretending not to care. It means feeling everything, but choosing how and when to express it. It means processing emotions privately, intelligently, without letting them dictate your behavior. It's the difference between a boy and a man. Boys lash out when hurt. They try to prove themselves when insecure. They raise their voice to seem strong. But men breathe, men assess. Men conserve their energy and only act when the action is meaningful. That's not weakness, that's mastery. This kind of emotional control creates a presence that is deeply felt but rarely explained. You walk into a room and people sense something about you. They can't quite name it, but they know not to test you. You speak less, but your words carry weight. You don't argue to prove a point. You let silence do the work. You don't get jealous, desperate, or overly attached, because you've seen how destructive those emotions can be when left unchecked. You've become the observer of your own mind, and in doing so, you've become your own guardian. Every time you choose composure over chaos, you reinforce your masculine frame. You reinforce your self-respect. You teach people how to treat you, not through aggression or dominance, but through restraint. You no longer chase peace outside yourself because you've found it within. That kind of control can't be faked. It's cultivated through pain, solitude, discipline, and detachment. And once it's yours, no one can take it away, because it's not built on anyone else. It's built on you, and that is where true power lies. Indifference drives obsession because the human psyche is wired to crave what it cannot fully access. And nothing creates more psychological tension than being met with emotional silence when someone expects engagement. When you become indifferent, not in a performative or forced way, but from a deeply internal, authentic detachment, you remove the emotional fuel that others rely on to control or validate themselves. You see, people are used to emotional responses. They're used to seeing you react. They expect your attention, your effort, your jealousy, your emotional availability. It reassures them of their worth, of their influence, of their control. But when you go silent, when your interest fades, when your energy becomes scarce, their mind starts to spiral, not because you did something, but because you stopped doing everything they took for granted. The more you care openly, the more predictable you become. You call when they ignore you. You double text when they don't respond. You explain yourself when they misunderstand you. You overextend yourself hoping they'll appreciate it. And what happens? They get used to it. They start seeing your energy as a given. You become a background hum in their life, accessible, emotionally available, unmysterious. But the minute you pull back, they feel the shift like a sudden drop in temperature. You no longer react. You no longer explain. You no longer reach. And that absence becomes louder than any message you could ever send. Your silence is no longer just quiet. It becomes haunting. Indifference is powerful because it forces people to face their own emptiness. They projected emotional responsibility onto you. They relied on your attention to validate their existence. When that's gone, they're left alone with their own internal void. And this is when obsession begins, not because you're doing anything manipulative, but because the human ego cannot tolerate ambiguity. It hates unresolved narratives. It hates not knowing where it stands. And your indifference creates that unresolved narrative. Suddenly, they're overanalyzing your silence, wondering what happened, replaying past conversations, questioning their own value. Because the story they told themselves about how much you cared, about how important they were, is being disrupted. And in that disruption, you become unforgettable. Understand this. It's not about being cold. It's about being unavailable to people who haven't earned your energy. It's about showing restraint, not reacting just because someone tried to provoke you, not chasing just because someone pulled away. It's about recognizing that your attention is currency, and not everyone deserves to spend it. Most people throw breadcrumbs to keep you emotionally tethered. They do the bare minimum to keep you orbiting around them. A like here, a vague message there, a delayed reply when they sense you're pulling away. They want to keep you confused, emotionally engaged, half hopeful. But when you become indifferent, none of that works anymore. The breadcrumbs go unnoticed. The tactics fall flat. Because you're no longer hungry for validation. You're full on self-respect. And here's what's most fascinating. The less you try to be seen, the more visible you become. The less you try to explain, the more people want to understand you. The less you chase, the more they wonder why. That wonder becomes mental real estate. You occupy their mind not through force, but through absence. Not through noise, but through quiet. They start checking your profile, watching your stories, asking mutual friends about you, trying to decode your silence. They romanticize you not because you're perfect, but because they don't have full access to you anymore. and the scarcity of your presence makes your value inflate in their eyes. This is why so many men lose the game of connection. They give everything up front, all the attention, all the availability, all the effort, all the access. There's no mystery left, no space for the other person to miss them, no friction for desire to form. You can't crave what you already have unlimited access to. But when you practice indifference, you give the other person space to feel your absence. You stop trying to be liked and start becoming unforgettable. You stop trying to explain your worth and start being felt through your detachment. And make no mistake, this doesn't only apply to romantic dynamics. Indifference is a power move in every relationship dynamic. Friends who used to take you for granted start questioning their access. Colleagues who dismissed you start noticing your silence in meetings. Family members who manipulated you through guilt start wondering why their tactics don't affect you anymore. It's the same principle. Emotional distance creates value. It creates respect. It creates curiosity. And curiosity is the seed of obsession. Because people always want to understand what they can't control, and a man who is indifferent, who doesn't react, who remains centered, is impossible to control, and that makes him unforgettable. A man who doesn't care can't be broken because he's no longer held hostage by emotional expectations, illusions of control, or the desperate need to be chosen by anyone. He's crossed a threshold that most people never reach, the point where he's willing to lose everything rather than betray himself. That kind of man terrifies people, not because he's cruel, but because he's free. He has nothing to prove, nothing to chase, and nothing to protect when it comes to his ego. He has walked through the fire of disappointment, rejection, betrayal, and heartbreak, and instead of crumbling, he forged a new version of himself. One that doesn't beg for validation, one that doesn't collapse at the absence of affection, one that doesn't try to hold on to people who clearly want to leave. When a man truly stops caring in the emotional sense, when he stops clinging to how things should be, how people should treat him, or how he wishes the world would respond, he becomes untouchable, not numb, not bitter but elevated. He has grieved enough to become immune, not to pain, but to desperation. He can feel loss, yet not panic. He can see someone drifting away and not chase. He can watch opportunities close without begging the door to reopen. This inner stillness is born out of experience, of seeing too much, of giving too much, of finally realizing that most of the suffering in life doesn't come from what happens. It comes from our emotional resistance to it. And when he releases that resistance, when he lets go of attachment to outcomes, he stops being breakable. Most people are breakable because they attach their identity to things they can't control. They tether their self-worth to whether or not someone loves them back. They define their value based on who chooses them, stays with them, validates them, or praises them. And when that praise or presence is taken away, they shatter. But the man who doesn't care in that way, who doesn't hinge his peace on another person's approval, is already whole before anyone arrives. He doesn't need you to stay for him to feel worthy. He doesn't need you to explain yourself so he can sleep at night. He's at peace with the silence, at peace with uncertainty, at peace with endings, and that peace is what makes him dangerous. Because you can't manipulate a man who's fine with walking away. You can't hurt someone who doesn't need you to feel okay. People underestimate the power of not caring because they confuse it with being cold or disconnected. But it's actually a form of emotional independence. It's the ability to love deeply without becoming enslaved, to be kind without being taken advantage of, to give without expecting. It's when you're capable of everything emotionally, Yet you don't let those emotions control your behavior. You've trained your nervous system to remain still even when the world around you is falling apart. You've learned to sit with pain instead of escaping it. You've faced your shadows and emerged stronger, not because you avoided the storm, but because you walked through it willingly. A man who doesn't care can't be guilt-tripped. He doesn't respond to emotional blackmail. He doesn't need revenge, validation, or even closure. He doesn't chase apologies because he knows how to close the chapter on his own. He's not fueled by bitterness. He's fueled by clarity. Clarity of who he is, what he deserves, and what he's no longer willing to tolerate. That kind of clarity burns through illusions. It makes it impossible for people to manipulate him through half-efforts, gaslighting, breadcrumbing, or emotional game. He sees the game for what it is and simply refuses to play, and that refusal doesn't come from arrogance. It comes from healing, from knowing too much, from choosing peace over performance. What really sets this man apart is that he doesn't broadcast his detachment. He doesn't need to post about how unbothered he is. He simply moves differently, quieter, slower, with purpose. He doesn't explain his silence. He lets people feel the void. He doesn't announce his exit. He just stops showing up, and people feel it because his presence wasn't loud, but it was valuable. His energy wasn't dramatic, but it was grounding, and now that it's gone, the contrast is deafening. But he doesn't look back. He doesn't need people to miss him. He doesn't need them to regret. His strength is not in their reaction. It's in his decision, and once he decides to stop caring, that decision is final. This is the level of emotional detachment where true masculine strength lives. Not in how loud you are, how dominant, how aggressive, but in how quietly you can walk away without resentment, in how easily you can choose solitude over chaos, in how quickly you can cut off what threatens your peace without a second thought. That's not heartlessness. That's self-respect in its highest form. The man who doesn't care isn't afraid of losing people. He's only afraid of losing himself. And once you reach that level, once your self-loyalty becomes stronger than your emotional cravings, you become something rare, something unshakable, something unbreakable. So now you understand the truth. When you stop caring, you're not giving up, you're leveling up. You're shedding the emotional chains that kept you reactive, uncertain, and bound to people who never deserved your soul. You're not heartless. You've just found your center. You're not cold. You're calm. You've stopped chasing ghosts. You've stopped explaining your worth. You've stopped bleeding for validation. And in doing so, you've awakened the part of you that was always meant to lead, not just others, but yourself. This is the power of the dark masculine, silent self, possessed, unmoved by chaos, untouched by emotional games. You don't need permission anymore. You don't need understanding. You don't need to be chosen, because you've chosen yourself. And when a man does that, truly, fully, unapologetically, he becomes what every game fears and every soul remembers. A man who cannot be owned, cannot be broken, and cannot be ignored. Let them wonder. Let them regret. Let them talk. But you move in silence, in purpose, in control, because when you stopped caring, you took back everything.